apart. They work so hard to try and be good enough. And you could weep, because that's not the way to be righteous. And if you read Romans 10 carefully, Paul says, you don't have to try hard to be righteous. It's not as if it's up in heaven and you have to get up there and get righteous. It's not as if it's down in Hades and you have to go down to get it. It's as near as your mouth. It's as near as your heart. Confess with your mouth and believe in your heart, and you've found the secret of righteousness. Is that great? And so in the last bit of chapter 10, he deals with what could be excuses for the Jewish people. The first excuse you could make for them is that they haven't heard the gospel. But Paul says they have. The Jews have heard about Jesus. They know about him. Paul says, using the words of Psalm 19, their speech has gone out in all the earth. Wherever the sun and the stars are seen, the gospel has been heard. They know. But they're still trying to work for their salvation. And so are most people in America. Because if you talk to them, they'll say, I'm as good as anyone who goes to church. As much as to say, God will accept me. I'm good enough for God. And human pride finds it very difficult to admit I will never be good enough for God. If he doesn't make me good enough, I can never be part of his new universe. And Paul says, but they have to hear the gospel, and how shall they hear unless someone goes and preaches? And how will someone go and preach to them unless they're sent? It's very logical. But he says the simple fact is God has sent preachers to them. And they have gone. And they've met a hard people. Jews are probably the hardest people, even harder than Muslims, to bring to Christ. Because they're trying to be good. They're trying to live righteously. They're trying to keep the laws of God, and righteousness will never come that way. Only those who've really tried to be good enough for God realize what a failure it is. People like Martin Luther. He was so anxious to get sin out of his life, he whipped himself to unconsciousness to try and discipline his body. He prayed to 21 saints a week, 3 a day, asking for help to be good. And he came to realize that either God gave him righteousness or he'd never make it. John Wesley was the same. And all through history, people have tried to be religious, tried to be good, and always failed miserably. And they've known it. And all the time, God was waiting to give them his righteousness. And all they had to do was receive it. It's yours. For the gospel is not just offering you forgiveness, it's offering you holiness. Jesus is offering to make you the person that you've longed to be in your best moments. And everybody I talk to, I ask them, are you as good a person as you could have been by now? Or do you have regrets? And everyone who's honest with me says, I have regrets. I've made wrong choices. And it's affected my character. And every person listening to my voice, you are the kind of person that you have chosen to be. It is as simple as that. And if you've made some wrong choices, that is preventing you even now from being the person God wanted you to be. I often wonder, God, what kind of a person could I have been by now, in my 80th year, if I'd been trusting and obeying the Lord in everything for 80 years, what kind of a person would I be now? And I know I'm not. He's got to do it. I'll never be what I want to be. Can't be. Got too many regrets as I look back. If God doesn't make me righteous, I never will be. But the gospel is He can, and He will. Just put the clay in my hands, He says, and run with me. That's the good news. So the Jews have failed to achieve righteousness. And it wasn't far from them. It was so near to them, as near as breathing, as near as speaking, as near as their heart. But they wouldn't respond in faith. Whoever calls on the Lord will be saved, He says. But you can try so hard not to need to call on the Lord and think you can make yourself. So let's come to the final part of this. He says, have they not heard? Yes, they have. So it's not only that the Jews have failed to achieve righteousness their own way, they have also failed to accept revelation. How can they call on the Lord unless they've heard His call to them? How can they believe in Him if they haven't heard? How can they hear until the preacher comes? How can anyone preach until they're sent? You know, I've got beautiful feet. Did you know that? And yet I've never liked my feet because I've had flat feet all my life. And I've had to wear special built-up shoes as a child and didn't put my bare feet to the ground for years, hoping that my feet would improve, and they haven't. And that's why I'm sitting to talk to you, because my feet are now in their 80th year, and the rest of me isn't. That's the problem. See? But my feet are beautiful, according to the Bible. Do you know why? It says, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. Right? Because I came here on my 2 feet, and they brought me to share the good news with you that God can make you righteous. But the problem is that the Jews have shut their ears and shut their hearts. And when they hear about Jesus, they harden their hearts. Tragic. It's not God's fault that they have not accepted the good news. Maybe they haven't heard it all. Oh yes, says Paul, they have. And the fact is that Gentiles often respond to the gospel the moment they hear it, because they're not trying to be good. And they accept the good news readily. The real problem is in them, not in anyone else. And God says, I've held out my hands all the day long to the Jewish people. He's pleaded with them. He wants them desperately. And they won't respond. So has God finished with them? Has God written them off? Has God said, I've tried so hard with you Jews, but I've tried enough. You've missed your chance now. There's no hope for you. And the answer to that is in chapter 11. And it's one huge no. What a God we have. The very next chapter, as we'll see tomorrow morning, begins, has God rejected the Jews? Has He wiped His hands off them? Have He said, enough's enough? No, never. And that word is the strongest negative in the Greek language. It means never let it be. Impossible. Unthinkable. Because God made a covenant with the Jewish people. He married them. And God hates divorce. And He's not finished with the Jews yet. So what we've done in chapter 9, the Jews in the past were selected. not for salvation, but for service.